Greetings, friends, and welcome to part 2 of my look at the Rush Discography, my feature called From Attempt to Realization. And this time we're going to be taking a look at records number 3 and 4 of their studio releases, which is Caress of Steel and 2112. So let's get started, because these two are probably one of the best examples of the attempt to realization situation that I started talking about with the debut record and Fly By Night. So let's take a look at Caress of Steel first. So Caress of Steel, let me just grab the record here. This is my heavily used and much loved copy of Caress of Steel. It is a Canadian very early pressing. As you can see at the bottom, it's marketed by Polydor, which is usually a very early indicator of an early pressing. Also, the early pressings were on gatefold. Later reissues were not gatefold. And also, the vinyl is a dead giveaway as well. This is the Canadian first press, which I'm pretty sure this is. It was out on the Mercury label. As we know, later on, Rush started their own independent label, Anthem, and they started releasing their records on that press, on that print, and those labels would appear on the records. So this is another way you can tell that this is pretty early pressing of this record. This is also, I believe, a master disc mastering. Yes, it is. Its master disc is stamped on the dead wax along with GK, which is for Gilbert Kong, which means it is usually an excellent sounding version of the album. So this album came out September 24th, 1975. It was recorded at Toronto Sound Studios, and it came out on, obviously, Mercury Records. Later on, it came out on Anthem once they started reissuing these albums on their own label. And in Japan, this album came out on Atlantic Records in Japan. Of note as well, something that's very important to anybody who knows Rush history, this was the very first album to have the artwork done by Hugh Syme, somebody who would continue to do their album covers until they were pretty much finished. So for a long, long time, Mr. Hugh Syme was their album cover maker. Now, the other record that we're going to be talking about is 2112. Here is my much loved but not as abused looking cover. This also is a gatefold. And yeah, this is done by Capital EMI of Canada. Down at the bottom, that's another way of really knowing that this is the early press. But by this time, you start to see these things appear on the Anthem label. And this is what the Anthem label looks like. Oh, sorry. Now this one, I believe, yes, this is a very interesting one, actually. Sorry, I just have to double check to confirm this. This is what's called a split record as far as mastering goes, because you have TLC in the dead wax on side A with a KE and it looks like a Y. So this is some individual I'm not familiar with from the Lacquer channel who mastered side A. But if you flip the record, you'll see in the dead wax here that you have JW-McClare, which means that this was done by Joe Webster at McClare Sound in Toronto, side 2. So this is not too early a pressing, it's probably a little bit later, but so I had to correct myself, so that even though that cover says that it's from that time period, well, you know what, it might actually be of that time period. I'm not too sure when McClare Sound actually started their operations, so it's possible, but yeah, in any case, that's a very interesting pressing. Now, 2112 was released April 1st, 1976, and that was also recorded at Toronto Sound Studio. And ironically, that is the last album that was recorded at Toronto Sound. Their next studio record, which is A Farewell to Kings, they started going overseas to record their records. 2112 did very well for the band. It's the record that pretty much saved them and let them continue having a record contract. It went 3 times platinum, 3 million copies in the United States. It went double platinum in Canada, 200,000 copies in Canada, and it is a gold album in the UK, selling 100,000 copies. Now, in reference to what I was talking about before, this album is a great example of what I was talking about with them having a blueprint idea for something and then actually knocking it out of the park with their next record. So when they did Crest of Steel, they were full tilt in their thinking of making a conceptual record. They were, going in headstrong with the whole progressive rock idea. And on this record, you'll see that, because on side A, you have the Necromancer, which is a long 3-part section song. And on side 2, you'll see that they have the Fountain of Lamneth, which is a whole side-long piece. And while I'll say that I love this record now, I know that many people, when they first heard this record, didn't think it was their best work. Some people even went as far as to say that they didn't understand it. Notably, Mr. Paul Stanley of Kiss. When Rush were on tour for Fly By Night, the record before this, they toured a lot with Kiss, opening for the band, and they became good friends. And one night when they were on tour, I believe it was Geddy Lee or maybe Alex Lifeson, brought an early cassette copy of this record into the van and let Paul Stanley hear it, who was anxious to hear their new album, and just gave him a kind of look saying that he thought it was cool, but he didn't understand it. He just didn't feel that it was as good as their prior record. And I think that I'll definitely say I agree with that. I think Fly By Night is much better than this record. But it's a very important record because it did put them down the path of working on full-length conceptual sort of pieces. Now, one will say that they didn't really hit the mark with this record, and that's true, because there are some songs on here that are kind of weak. I mean, the whole Necromancer piece, I think, is not as well thought out. It's a little dull, I find. And while the Fountain of Lamneth is a lot better, there's still pieces on here that I'm not too hip on. Panacea is a little dull. And, the whole Didads and Narpods drum solo thing, while it's kind of cool, I don't understand how they really forwarded the story. They could have probably put a better actual song in there instead of just a piece with a drum solo bit with shouting over it. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Rush. Rush is my favorite band in the world. In my tree of bands that I like, Rush are here, and everything else is under it. So, for me to criticize that comes from a place in my heart. Now, the funny thing is that Geddy Lee years later said that when asked about this record, he didn't think it was their best work either, and he kind of admits that they weren't exactly very straight during the making of this record, that they were very high, as he would say, for the making of this record, which, might have been the case why it didn't turn out so good. Maybe not. Lots of bands have made records under the influence and they made masterpieces. So, they went out, did this. It didn't receive very well. They did a tour. The tour was labeled the Down the Tubes tour by the band and their crew, because instead of playing medium-sized halls, they started playing smaller halls and even going back to some clubs, which is not the way you want to go when you're trying to build a fan base. You want to be going higher and higher up and not plateau and start going down. So the record company became concerned, and they had a meeting in Chicago, I believe it was, to talk about what the plan was for the next record. And Terry Brown, who produced the album, and I believe it was Cliff Bernstein, who was A&R for Mercury, both convinced the record heads that the next record they're going to come up with some real corkers of singles. It's going to be really good. They're going to change their plans a bit, and so they got to go ahead to make their next record. So, and we all know that that's not the case as far as what happened, because, as is well noted, the band got pissed off, said that they didn't want to change their direction, style. They believed very much in what they were doing, and said if they were going to go out and lose their contract and quit and go back to their day job thing, then they're going to go out on their own terms. And this was their own terms. What's better about this record than that? Well, everything. First of all, the sound of this record is much better. Terry Brown, I think, really buckled down. Keep in mind, Fly By Night, they had 5 days to record it. Crust of Steel, they had 7 days to record it. And for this record, no, sorry, not 7 days, correction. They had 3 weeks to do Crust of Steel. This one, they had well over a month to sit down and really focus on it and make it the way they wanted it. Now, everybody, I'm sure, pulled up their socks. Maybe there wasn't as much pot going around in the studio at the time, and they really buckled down. And you can hear the anger in this record, and you can hear it in Geddy's voice, you can hear it in their performance, and I think that's what's seriously missing in Crest of Steel. Crest of Steel is a record, to me, where it sounds like they were happy that Fly By Night did so well. They won a Juno, and it's almost like they kind of sat on their laurels a little bit and sat back and said, yeah, let's just make a cool record, no pressure, and then it came back to bite them. This is another sign of desperation, much like Fly By Night. Pardon me, I'm stumbling over my words today. And like Fly By Night, how they were anxious and desperate to show what they had to offer, they were desperate and anxious to succeed on this record so that they can continue doing what they were doing. They didn't want to go out in a blaze of glory. They wanted to continue, and this record helped do that. The whole side one is 2112, which has Overture, Temples of Syrinx, Discovery, Presentation, Oracle, The Dream, Soliloquy, and Grand Finale, which is probably the best side of a record maybe since Close to the Edge. Incredible stuff. Like I said, you can hear the ferociousness in their playing. It's just unbelievable. And some of the best sounding drums on record, I think, that I've heard in a long time. Side 2 has The Passage to Bangkok, A Passage to Bangkok, Twilight Zone, Lessons, Tears, and Something for Nothing. Now, from those songs, Passage to Bangkok and Something for Nothing were the real standout songs that they continue to play for a long time. The Twilight Zone, while not a popular song, it was actually, I think, the first single off of this record, funny enough. So, while they didn't maybe like it enough to play it live all the time, they did believe in it enough to release it as a single. And you know what? It is sort of single material. And in a backward sort of way, they did give the record label what they wanted. You had a single. And even Something for Nothing was a decent song that could have been played on radio, and I think it did get played quite a bit. But 2112 is the piece that made them from this record, and is the example of the realization of what they were originally trying to go for. Now, while Crest of Steel, they were, I think it was just too laid back. It's more like a, pull out the bongs and the whine and just sit back and listen kind of record, whereas this is kind of the get pissed off, grab a pack of beer, and really get into it kind of record. So I think that's the difference in the two albums. And again, Rush are really good at that sort of thing, where they come up with an idea, it may not work out to totally how they envisioned it, and then the next record they find it, what they're looking for, and record it. So there you go. Rush 2112, one of the pinnacle classic records of their career, and one that if you don't own this in your record collection, you really must go out and buy one. So that's it for this part of the Rush segment. Next episode, we are not going to look at the live albums. They don't really have a bearing on my theory in that sense. So the next one we're going to be looking at is A Farewell to Kings and Hemispheres, and another great example of the attempt to realization. So until next time, this is Mark Anthony K saying bye for now. I hope you're having a great day.